Hi, I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. We are nearing the end of 2025, and throughout 2025, I've been doing a library challenge because I wanted to use my library more. And this is sort of the wrap-up of October, November, December. So for October, I had two prompts. I have two prompts each month. One of them is to read a book about an activity that the library offers that is a non-reading activity. So because a lot of libraries do have activities geared towards learning, in my case, because I live in Norway, learning Norwegian, I read this book by Helene Uri, Who Said What? Women, Men and Language, where she is analyzing how men and women are using their language differently, but also how language is gendered. So in regard to, for example, what I talked about in regard to Toril Moi, who said that language, you can understand the gender theory of language and literature as in language is used to gender someone, or language is gendering in and of itself. By creating the word man, you are othering non-man, which is woman. This is very much how gender roles are put into place by how we speak differently to girls and boys. Boys are active, girls are fussy, and also how our use of language, therefore, is a part of our gendering. I have to admit this book was probably a bit... it was what I feared it was going to be mostly about, because when you're sort of talking about how women and language is gendering, what she sort of mostly focuses on is how women and men are treated differently also in regard to their language. And I knew that, you probably know that, most people who have read some kind of research know that in most patriarchal countries, men and women are treated differently. That's how gender roles are created, for better or for worse. But what what I wanted it to be more about is more the other aspect of it, how certain words can be interpreted as more feminine or masculine, or sort of the other ways, or if there are other ways of how language can be gendered, other than patriarchy means woman bad, which I think is what she mostly talks about. So, and most of what she talks about is some things I already knew. So if you have never sort of read about the gendering of language, this could probably be a good introduction book. But to me, it was a bit too simplistic. But then again, I have read some parts of this. The second prompt for October was a film and the book that the film was based on. And I both read and saw Carrie by Stephen King. Both were phenomenal. And I hope I'm not going to spoil a book. Did it come out in the 70s or 80s? 74. So most people will probably have heard a story, so I'm going to tell the entire story, and press here to move on if you do not want spoilers at all. But this is about a young girl who has a mother who is overbearing, and she is getting bullied at school, and she is invited to the prom, has a bucket of pig's blood splattered on her, and goes full Carrie by burning down the entire school with her bullies in them. So that is sort of the basics of both stories, and that's sort of the basics of both the book and the film. But wow, were these two very, very different. Even if the sort of plots are very similar, the stories are very different due to a few changes. Now, when Stephen King wrote the book, he wrote it as if it was an expose, in a sense, as if it's sort of there's a bunch of journalistic texts. There are one of the characters that survive is writing a form of memoir. And that also means that we get a lot of different information. In addition to that, there are two choices that are very different from the film for the book, which makes it a different story, even if it doesn't impact the plot a lot. Now, the choice number one is that in the book, it's very clear that Carrie has had telekinetic powers since she was a little child. So there are mentions of how she brought down rocks from the sky when she was, I think, 2 or 3 years old. The second thing that they changed, and in the film, it's very much sort of hinted to that her telekinesis powers came into fruition when she got her period at the start of the film. So there you have quite a big difference between Carrie getting her powers when she gets her period and Carrie always having her powers in some sense. And the second change that they make is that in the film, there is this very, very important scene where the mother, who is overbearing and domineering and abusive towards Carrie, talks about the night that Carrie was conceived. And her mother, in both books, are very Christian conservative. And when she is talking in the film, she is talking about how she felt lust for the first time when Carrie was conceived, and that was a dark sin. So she has this idea of sin already from the creation of Carrie when she was conceived. But in the book, it is very much sort of implied, very heavily implied, that Carrie was conceived by rape. And just the fact that Carrie was conceived by a sexual assault makes me view the character of the mother, even if a lot of the other things she does in the book and film very similar, makes me view them as very, very different characters. So the mother grew up in a very conservative home. She is assaulted. She is thrown out of her home because she has dared to sin. She gives birth to a child, and then the child makes rocks fall from the sky. I would probably... I can understand that the mother sort of half goes insane based on that. Okay. That's weird things. Of course, I can understand why she thinks that Carrie is a product of the devil. literally a product, not symbolically as she is in the film, literally a product of the devil. Seriously. And that also makes it such a different context to everything when her mother in the film says, "Stay at home." You feel it like it's a command. She wants to control you. But when the mother talks about stay at home in the book, you can feel it's fear. The mother is afraid. She is driven by fear. And therefore, the story of the book becomes more about trauma and healing or not healing from trauma. The mother with the sexual assault, Carrie with her bullying, and everything just burning down because of this burden of trauma. While in the film, everything that happens is very much linked to sexuality. The first thing that we see in the film is Carrie gratifying herself, masturbating in a public place, getting her period, and freaking out because she doesn't know what her period is. So the film contextualizes everything that we see through sex and sexuality in contrast to trauma, which is very much the way I read the book. And if you sort of think that I've read too much of the trauma aspect to it, please let me know. It was such a brilliant comparison because the story beats, the plots are so similar in the book and the film. So how the two stories became so different. For November, we had the Prompts book club. And for that one, I read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel García Márguez. This was a book I have long wanted to read because I've read a few of his other books. And it's not my favorite. I'm going to... And I tried to put into words, why didn't I like this one when I enjoyed so much of a few of his other books? My favorite book of his is Love in the Time of Cholera. I read that and I thought that was absolutely amazing book. There sort of the longer I think about it, the more I am starting to like it. This book is about a man who settles in a place and starts a family, and a town is slowly building up around it. And then sort of we follow this family throughout several generations in how they are interacting with society around them, and of course magical realism. There's a brilliant example of magical realisms in this book. For example, that one of the characters, members of this family, goes insane and is therefore tied to a tree, but gains weight being tied to this tree. So there are wonderful sort of small, brilliant scenes throughout this book. And I am in no way saying that this is a bad book, but I can't really put my finger on it, and it kind of annoys me that I can't really put a finger on it because I've been thinking and thinking. It could be it's sort of similar to House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende, that family sagas just aren't my thing, that I simply don't think that the relationships between that many generations are interesting. why wouldn't I think that that's interesting? Please, someone explain why I'm wrong about this book in the comments. It's not a bad book. I understand why I won the Nobel Prize. I just really, really liked Love in the Time of Cholera. And those are two very different books. Then we have our librarian recommends prompts. And I read Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa. And this is about, the author has, I'm just going to say if they actually tell. I know that the author has some kind of disability, physical disability. She has congenital myopathy, and the main character in the book also has congenital muscle disorder. I have no idea where my English just went, but the book is about a woman who has a muscle disorder and is therefore sort of bound to her room. It's difficult to her to leave her room, so she lives in a care facility. And what the book in general talks about is, of course, can people with physical disability, especially women with physical disability, be sexual creatures? Because the main character makes money, among other things, by writing erotica, and talks a lot on Twitter, now X, about how she wants to have an abortion because that's a normal thing to do for women. Of course, she will never be able to to give birth to a child, but just the fact that you've become pregnant means that you've had sex. So there is a lot of brilliant symbolism in regard to the whole discussion. What do we feel about people with a form of physical disability and sex? She talks a lot about, for example, how she also has been a lot of infantilized because she can't, she needs someone to help clean her, which is kind of what you do with children. So how can she then be a sexual being, despite being a sexual being? This was longlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2025. And I loved this book. It was a wonderful... I've just realized that I don't really read a lot of books that talk specifically about disability, and especially physical disability. So I was glad I picked it up to sort of rectify my lack of books with physical disability. And if you know any other books that you would recommend, leave the comments, because I want to read more. In December, I had the prompt, again, non-fiction book based on a non-reading activity. In 2025, I had 12 prompts and 2 and 2 of them. And it's not uncommon for libraries to lend out film, but also showcase film. And I therefore borrowed the book, the Film's Classic by Øyvor Vik, which is a Norwegian book. Yes. I like reading books like this, where you sort of list the 50 best films, or the 100 best films, or 50 best books, or 100 best books, or 1001 best books, because there is something interesting about canonization. That is, which object do we define as the best based on what criteria? What I sort of didn't like with this one was that I felt it lacked an explanation of why these films. It just presented the films in a sense. So it presented The Bike Thief, it presented Frankenstein, it presented Pulp Fiction, but it didn't actually spend any time explaining why these 50. So it wasn't the book that I hoped it would be. And lastly, for December, I had the prompt to pick a book based on a display. And the display I chose was around mental health. And one of the things we tend to do in Norway to help with our mental health is to walk in the woods. So I read Skogen, which means the forest or the woods, by Anne Sverdrup-Thygeson. And she is a professor of biology. And this is, I think, her third book. And I know that her two other books have been translated into English. But I don't know if this one specifically has been translated into English. And what I liked about this book is that she managed to present a very complicated field, which is the biology of the forest, in a very, in sort of a very easy way for someone who has no knowledge of this topic at all. So she explains very well why the forests works the way it works. What happens if you cut down trees? What happens if you don't cut down trees? What happens if there is a forest fire? What happens if there isn't a forest fire? What happens if the forest becomes too cultivated? What happens if it isn't cultivated? What happens if we clean off all of the dead trees? What happens if we don't do that? That there are so many, that the forest is an entire ecosystem that is very much dependent on one another. And if you do X, all of the other domino will also fall. So it was an introduction to a very sort of interesting field in regard to how different types of forest work and function. And one of the things I especially liked is that you have something, she goes into detail to explain what an forest is. And that is something that has been talked about more and more, because that is a type of forest that has never been cultivated. And of course, there are less and less that type of forests in the world as we humans start cultivating. And how she sort of explains that it's not enough to think that, I'm just cleaning up, for example, I'm removing the dead debris, because there are so many insects and flowers and fungus that live on these dead trees. So if you, again, she has two other books that I know have been translated into English. And if you are interested in these topics, I would recommend her for someone who is, as an introductory book for it. So I have now spent an entire year trying to use my library more often. And I have learned a lot of both why I want to use it and, of course, Some of the reasons why I probably haven't. I love the library as an institution. I think it's so important because you can't really create a democratic society unless knowledge is accessible to people for free, because not everyone has the money to pay for books. And library is starting to become one of the few sort of third spaces that we have that are indoors and organized that is free. And you also have people with specific knowledge that can help you when you come to the library, which is a sort of someone who can help you bridge the gap from the unknown to the known, which is so important in society, especially in, for example, Norway. I don't know how it is in other parts of the world, but in Norway, our community areas, our communities are becoming fewer and fewer. People are becoming more and more individualists. So we don't really meet one another. We don't really talk to one another. We just parallel exist. And having, therefore, an arena where everyone can get someone to help being this bridge is so important if you want to have a form of democratic society. At the same time, I have realized doing this project why I'm not using my library as often. And the problem is that the way I read now is very different than when I was an avid library user in my 20s. I have loved a lot of the books that I have read during this project. I've also hated a lot of them because I'm just picking what the library can offer me. And the books I very often now want to read, I have a project about reading a book from a different country of the world. I am also now doing projects as in sense of women in translation. I'm doing projects of genre books in translation. I'm doing a form of thriller sort of project, so I'm analyzing thriller books. And you can't search the library for books in the way that I want to search for them. You can't really search for authors based on their nationality. You can't search for books based on, can you give me an eco-thriller book? You have to Google eco-thriller books, get a list, find something that's most likely going to be accessible to you, and hope that library has that book, which they may have and may not have. And the problem is that they may have not book 1 to 5 on that list, but maybe they have book 50. But then you have to go through all of those 49 other books beforehand. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to start using my library as a part of my main reading, rather than what I felt it became now, which was more tacked on. I read library books in addition to everything else I was reading. I didn't get my books from my library. So I'm going to do the project again. I'm going to remove some of the prompts, going down to 8 and having them happen 3 times in the year, because some of the prompts weren't simply working. The least borrowed, for example, weren't really something they had any numbers on, or one of the oldest books they had weren't something they really had numbers on. So those are kind of prompts that weren't really working. But I'm going to try again, and I'm going to continue to work with trying to use my library more, not again as something that's just tacked on, but as a part of my main reading. So, how are you using your library? Are you having the same trouble I'm having with how do you find the books that you want to read in your library when you don't really just want to read the most popular? Let's talk in the comments down below, and thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.